Okay, so hi, welcome back. For you who didn't know from before, my name is Luis, and I am a digital product designer and UX researcher at YLD. So this morning we had a conversation with half of the speaker crew, and now I have the rest of the speaker crew here. So we're also going to have a little quick conversation about a completely different topic. Before we get started, if I could just ask you guys to introduce yourself. Do you want to start with you?
Hi, my name is Lily Dart. I think you all met me earlier. I'm Head of Design Systems at Lloyds Banking Group.
Hi, my name is Laura. I used to be a senior developer at The Guardian, then they saw me try run my talk, and now I'm currently unemployed. I'm starting at Facebook next week.
I'm James, one, for the record. I'm a product designer at YLD.
I guess I'm James too. James L. I'm a co-founder and lead developer at Thoughts and Function.
Hi, I'm Kathleen McMahon. I am the tech lead for the O'Reilly Media Design System.
Thank you. Well, and I'm Bernardo. I work at Travel Republic. I'm a software engineer there. So, yeah.
So what I wanted to talk about today is basically, it was actually quite difficult to come up with topics for this conversation because there's so much within the design system that is worth talking about. But I feel like because we have designers and engineers, and this conference is all about how we bring designers and engineers closer together, I wanted to, in my opinion, I feel like the conversation around engineers should design and designers should code, I feel like that conversation potentially has slowed down a little bit lately. And at the same time, this might just be my reflection, at the same time I also feel like we talk more about design system. So my question is, do the panel feel like design system is that bridge that we have finally found how we get engineers and designers to work together? Discuss. Who wants to go first?
So I think the design system is definitely a formal bridge. So if we take the waterfall process of a designer coming up with the designs and then giving it to developers, it normally goes back to the designer at some point. So it's definitely a formal bridge. But I do think that there could be like a softer bridge between developers and designers who just kind of understand each other and knowing each other's capabilities while they're working. So a designer doesn't create crazy designs that a developer can't do within the time frame. I think that's also really important.
Okay, so this is one form of a bridge, but maybe there isn't enough close conversation still. Is that what I'm hearing? Yeah. And I'm getting a nod from you, Kathleen, so I'm going to hand over to you.
So I am going to agree with James. I think that a design system is a great way to foster collaboration between designers and developers. And ideally on that team, you have team members that have a blend of different types of skill sets. I mean, we're not going to be strong in everything, but it's nice when you have, like, maybe you're stronger in one part of the stack versus another, and you know how to bridge together and collaborate a little more to break down that waterfall that even though you are collaborating on that design system, there still is a little bit of that, throw it over the fence, throw it back, and if you can pair together more or just solve it in a better way where you can share those ideas, you can, I would say, develop and design a little bit faster and higher quality components.
Okay, that's a really interesting point, and I think that's a good, I want to jump into you, James, here, because you guys mentioned earlier something about setting up almost like a design system council, and you had designers and engineers representing that, and I am going to disclose that I was part of that as well, so so I think it's a good time, if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think just going back sort of to the previous point that, like, a design system is definitely not a substitute for communication, but I think sometimes that can somewhat be the impression. I think when you're actually speaking in the shared language of, components and tokens and stuff like that, it really does help to bridge it. But you obviously still need the kind of structure around it, and you actually probably need more structure around it because there's just so much more information to actually communicate between the two. But yeah, like, talking about components means you don't actually get necessarily as lost in the semantics of your discipline as much, which I think can sometimes happen if you're just talking designer to engineer.
So maybe I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I think I'm thinking back on, I think it was Sid's talk, and how the front end now has like a front of the front end and a back of the front end. And I think our tools for the front of the front end are failing us massively. So what I mean by this is that if I think about it, the complexity of building front-end code is not so much the code itself, but just dealing with layouts, dealing with state, dealing with a couple of things that ideally should fall in the hands of designers, and they should be empowered to make those decisions and to have tools that help them build that. And I think in that note, we don't have anything like that at the moment, and I think that's a shame. And I think that would get us closer. Basically, I'm calling for Adobe Flash to come back, I guess.
No. No, I agree. I agree with you, Laura. And I think the interesting thing I see is actually a design system can easily be a crutch for people not talking, because you can have more confidence that when you hand over a design document without ever having spoken to the developers, that it will broadly be accurate and they will be comfortable with it. And I think the thing that still upsets me the most in dealing with designers and developers, having been both, is that a lack of understanding that is the medium we are designing for. It is the medium we're designing in. So I still see a lot of fear from designers who aren't familiar with code, with not even wanting to try to have the conversations because they don't want to be overwhelmed by technical language. And I can understand that. I think, as developers, we can be pretty snotty sometimes about the way that we talk to other people. But it's a real problem. And I think design systems have made that handover easier, but not necessarily better quality.
I want to say as well that as designers, we can also be pretty snotty sometimes. So I think, so I think that goes both ways. So at least we're communicating equally in some aspects. So I also want to hear your opinion as well, Nano.
Yeah, I think when we talk about design systems, sometimes the conversation is kind of split between the people that are producing the design system. So we have like designers and developers working to kind of produce the guidelines, the components, and etc. And you also have the other side, which are also designers and developers, consuming the design system. So I think the design system, in one way, for the consumers, it kind of removes a little bit that notion of the end-off, of like the specs. You don't have that because you already have the components ready for you, the guidelines, it's all in place. But at the same time, you need to increase a lot of the conversation from the producing side, because designers and developers really need to work together to be able to find a common ground. And kind of create that language that then will be applied for everything in the company. Not only we tend to focus too much on designers and developers, but I think, and I'm going to touch a little bit on that on my talk, but I think that design systems has been like a topic that kind of affects everything in an organization. You see like management layers talking about design systems, and I think it's a very good opportunity to kind of introduce those topics into the discussion, because sometimes design is really not something that is discussed among like C-level, for example, and you see design systems kind of, oh, yeah, we use that, so I think it's a good entry point.
So I think that's a really interesting point, and I want to tie back to the conversation we had this morning about buy-in, because I think maybe a design system can also act as not just a conversation between engineers and designers, but also, as you say, C-level stakeholders and managers, product owners, people who don't normally, potentially are not so as engaged or understand fully. They know what needs to be done, but they don't always know, or the designers are doing something. I feel that's something that I hear often. Yeah, designers have got it. They will give us something. So is that helping that conversation as well?
It was just the slightly panicked look from the other end that got me. Yeah, no. So I think you're right. I think there's a lack of responsibility on both sides, and I see very much a conversation happening where the developers are kind of going, whatever, like something will be sent to us and we'll just do that thing, and not much engagement on, is it the right thing? I mean, we've talked a lot about accessibility, you talked a lot about accessibility, like, is it the right thing? Is that the experience that we're going for? Do the developers understand the experience we're actually trying to get to? Because, as you quite rightly also talked about with performance, and all of this other stuff, actually this is an important part of what we're doing. And I think, we talk about everyone being a designer, which is a phrase that pisses off a lot of designers. But everyone is everyone has a massive influence on the design process, on the outcome that we get to at the end. And right now we're all a bit like nobody. It just shocks me. Like, I'm 15 years into my career, having been both a designer and a dev, and we're still having this like, oh, developers is really like, oh, it's really horrible to talk to them, and designers are really, and I'm just like, 15 years we've had that for, and it's still going on. It's shocking, I think.
because you were talking about buy-in, but you were talking about it's bridging a gap. And yes, I wish that gap would go away because it's just that sense of like holding on to things versus sharing that it just doesn't help the process get better. And like, okay, everyone is a designer, but designers, can also, think in different technical ways. And I'm not saying like technology versus, non-technology and that kind of skills, but I think that there's a way that by talking through a problem, you can figure out that different solution versus doing an us versus them.
I think that's a really nice thing to say. I think I absolutely agree with you. And I think what I was also trying to point before, and I apologize if it wasn't clear, I wonder whether design system is not just closing the gap between designers and engineers, but is also helping us to close the gap with people that we need to get buy-in from, such as managers, such as stakeholders, such as C-level, because we actually have we now have something that we can gather around. Before it was difficult sometimes, I find anyway in my experience, that it can be difficult to find what is our talking point going to be, and we need to find a language that everybody understands, and is design system that language to help us with that?
I mean, I can touch on that. I think what a design system is great for in terms of that buy-on is like it gives like a tangible worth to design, because I think design a lot of the time can be kind of like sort of just glossed over as looking pretty. And I think actually, we saw in some of the talks before, like actually having those kind of key metrics about the value that can be incurred by introducing a design system. Like, I think that's a great bridge to non-designers and non-developers in terms of actually achieving buy-in, is seeing some kind of actual financial impact that implementing a design system can have.
And just to add to that a little bit, I think if we see the design system as an end solution, then that's not going to be a solution in terms of communication across all of us. So if we see it as an ongoing process and it's just a way of working, then it does encourage more interactions between all of us.
Absolutely.
Disagree really quickly. I agree with that, but also just to disagree. I think we run a risk with design systems that we make our work look easy and easy to replicate, actually. And I think we need to be really aware of that. I think Sue's talk showing the difference between designing an interface for end consumers versus designing for staff and the kind of design differences you need in there is a perfect example of how if you cut and paste apply this stuff without thought, you get a poor outcome. And I think design systems can give the impression, because that's sort of the impression they're supposed to give, that you can cut and paste an interface, right? So I think it is absolutely fantastic that we can talk to people about money saved and how these things will change the metrics. But I think we also run a risk of losing all of our UX designers because we have some pre-designed components, and actually people not understanding that that's a really critical part of the process, that we still have to have them. Losing all of our visual designers because the design script system already describes this, because people think we've already done that work. And I think we should be mindful of that as a community in terms of how we talk about this stuff.
Excellent. Do you want to add something to that as well?
I don't know. I think that and kind of transitioning to because I think that we've covered pretty much all of this topic. But I think that making the transition to the way that I think we'll be approaching design in the near future. I think the way that we design our products right now, I think it's going to change a lot, because this conversation is just starting. Like design system, the way that it is, like the modern design system is quite recent. And we've seen now the increasing of tools and increasing of resources to bring that like designer and developer relationship together. But I think that will, I think we're still focusing a little bit more on like this is the components that you can use in code. But I think we're also going to start looking at this is actually the way that you are going to design for this product. Forget about Sketch, forget about Figma, it's not going to be there. it's going to move to more code, more like being where you actually are using. I think, I don't know if it was you that mentioned that, but the medium is very important. And so we are going to witness designers moving to other mediums to design with developers, but with different tools. And I think that's, I don't know if you all agree, but I think that's going to be something that we are going to see more and more. And again, in my talk, I'm going to touch a little bit about that, but I think that we will be changing the process around design very soon.
Okay, fantastic. Do you want to add anything as well?
Just to add something really quick on
Yeah,
that. We
absolutely.
have been doing that for a long time. If anyone remembers the really old tools, our medium, like there used to be the medium of print, Quark, PageMaker, Director, Flash, HTML, CSS, still, Photoshop. What was one? There was one like Fireworks. So the tools, oh wow, flashback. So the tools, they keep morphing, and so everyone adapts. But it seems like the tools are becoming better to make you more comfortable in working in code and flexing your brain that way.
Great. I feel that feels like a really nice way to wrap up with. So just to kind of summarize, basically we're not saying that design system is the holy grail that we've been waiting for to connect engineers and designers with each other, but it's definitely helping. We have a responsibility to make sure that we understand what design system is and how it's used, and also that we advocate that to everybody else. It might be a good thing to use when you want to speak to other people about what design is actually worth. We are probably going to see different tools coming up where we merge as designers and engineers even more in our skills, and I know you're going to talk about that, so that's going to be really interesting. And if you're really lucky, Flash might be back. On that note, guys, thank you so much for joining me, and to the rest of you, thank you so much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Cheers, guys.